Project 2025 900-page mandate for leadership live part 2. Adriane Mayes, AI genius, bringing you random acts of kindness. Project 2025, the 900-page mandate for leadership. Live reading by Adriane Mayes on Independence Day 2025. We are here about this live event to talk about what matters and giving you a unique random acts of kindness on behalf of myself, reading the entire 900-page mandate for leadership document. Now, the whole document won't be read on this Independence Day, July 4th. Part 1, you can check out, is over 4 hours, and I'm going to break it down into 60-second segments. First, we're breaking it down into chapters within YouTube and using digital real estate to share the information and to have no biased opinion, to literally provide the information and read it verbatim from the actual document. And so this is significant as it covers the things that embodies CCC Because We Care Foundation, celebrating random acts of kindness in the community, 15 years, September 11th, 2024, representing wealth creation, financial education, travel experiences, health and wellness, AI marketing education, and growth in building billionaire brands with digital franchise branding with AI, with artificial intelligence. So the adjustments and the impact with Project 2025, the 900-page mandate for leadership live. It was funny, my business partner, Unica Gaines, and I were watching the presidential debate with Donald Trump and Joe Biden a few days back, and was listening to the platform and things that were brought uphold. And a few days ago as well, watching the BET Awards and Taraji P Henson having an amazing role in the awards program. But one thing that stood out was her pointing out the Project 2025. And I was like, Unica, what is the Project 2025? And so, went to go research, of course, and you get ad libs of information, pieces and bits of information, and come to find out there's this 900-page document that is literally what the Trump administration or the Republican or the next presidential candidate may actually entertain. And this is what Taraji P Henson was speaking about, the Project 2025. So without any personal ad libs, as you turn on the television now, between now until the election in November of 2024, you're going to have all types of versions. And so I wanted to take this Independence Day, this Freedom Day, freedom to be free. Adriane Mayes, what is dope? Detroit One Product, educate, to provide it without any personal adjustments, no additions, no Adriane Mayes insights, no billionaire making mindset inputs. I wanted to provide the actual documentation verbatim from the document, so that this information is out there. And so while this information will be there, that way you can clearly understand with clarity and transparency what the actual issue, what the Project 2025 is, and what this mandate for leadership live encompasses, how this actually affects you. So ensuring this information is clearly presented, no type of ad libs of any type of additional education of my part. This live empowers to aim, model, and innovate by showcasing dedication to community service by truth telling. No AI used here, just Adriane Mayes in the flesh on July 4th, 2024. And why this matters is empowerment through knowledge, understanding of the upcoming changes and opportunities can help businesses and individuals prepare and thrive. So as I was making phone calls for CCC Because We Care Foundation, looking for sponsorships and proposals for our virtual celebration for random acts of kindness, I was speaking to business owners about electric bikes, unicycles, electric tricycles, different forms of actual travel besides the actual vehicles, but electric vehicles, that being on the platform of the administration. And the small business owners hadn't heard of the Project 2025, let alone were intimidated by the 900 pages that the actual bestowed upon them. And so in making those calls and talking to people, that's when the bright idea this morning was like, hey, random acts of kindness. In the state of Michigan alone, it is one of the lowest literacy rates in regards to just reading whatsoever. And I'm in Detroit, Michigan. What up, though? So if you think about the amount of people that are actually going to read this document, it's nil to none. So that being a random act of kindness in itself. And then with the community engagement, we're trying to help our businesses thrive. And so having random acts of kindness and being able to build a digital real estate community where you can actually go and read this 900-page document. This is a part of what CCC Because We Care Foundation's ongoing effort to engage community thriving is all about. So our community is about acts of kindness, and our work and learning experience program is providing with the times, the trends, and understanding the health and wellness, and trying to provide small educations like these in regards to transparency and clarity. So given the confusion surrounding Project 2025, social media, what aims to be the direction, this actual live part 2, as part 1 was displayed earlier today, this part 2 is actually a continuation starting on chapter 3, where I'm aiming to provide unfiltered information directly to the public. So this is very important here on Independence Day, July 4th, 2024. And the whole goal, like I said, reading part 2 of Project 2025, starting on chapter 3, page 102 in the document. And this will be 60-second chapters. The reading will be broken into 60-second segments for easy social media consumption and sharing, as we know that the social media short attention spans have with the TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and all of the social media reels. So now with this random acts of kindness, this kind of event is kicking off before July 11th, our actual official random acts of kindness kickoff for our community. So building the momentum and celebrating 15 years of community service and culminating the major event that will be September 11th, the Random Acts of Kindness virtual celebration, September 11th, virtual live. So we're calling for all sponsors, and we're seeking sponsors to join our mission in enhancing this significant event and helping us in outreaching to make the event more impactful. And so thank you again to La Vida Massage Canton for coming on board to make a greater impact, providing gift certificates for the health and wellness portion to help out with giveaways for the September 11th event. So how to actually get involved, leave in the comments. If you want to actually be a vendor to donate and send over the sponsorship package, head over to cccwecaremi.com/sponsor and check out the different levels of sponsor. Look at the Motor City Visionary sponsor, become a $15,000 sponsor as you can in regards to the Random Acts of Kindness partnership packages, and submit your own ideas. Now is the time to join the community. As the community is going to vote, they're the ones with the most support will actually receive the funding on September 11th. And it's going to be all done live within the digital real estate community built here with acts of kindness. So celebrating 15 years of making a difference with CCC Because We Care Foundation, a special thanks to Taraji P Henson, highlighting the importance of this document, the Project 2025, during the BET Awards, sparking the interest to delve deeper and even do the research, and joining the journey as a digital marketing consultant, just seeing how algorithms work and using this knowledge to start an impactful journey on Independence Day for more information to understand how to this Project 2025. So again, jumping into the community, jumping into the research and understanding, leave in the comments if you have even delved into taking a look at this document, or even understanding what it even means. But that's what we're here to do together. We're here to build, grow, and empower and model. So when we're looking at the mandates for leadership, and we're now on chapter 3, page 102 in the document, as we're coming back from our break, and check out the actual previous live where we completed the chapter 1 and the previous pages. So chapter 3, central personnel agencies managing the bureaucracies. Let me make sure everything is set up here, situated, and we're going to go as long as possible and try to get all this information out in regards to Project 2025 900-page mandate for leadership live part 2 with Adriane Mayes, president of CCC Because We Care Foundation, giving random acts of kindness on this Independence Day, July 4th, 2024, the mandate for leadership. So overview, From the very first mandate for leadership, the personnel-less policy theme has been the fundamental principle guiding government's personnel management. As the U.S. Constitution makes clear, the president's appointment, direction, and removal authorities are the central elements of his executive power. In implementing this power, the president deserve the most talented and responsible workforce possible. Who the president assigns to design and implement his political policy agenda will determine whether he can carry out the responsibility given to him by the American people. The president must recognize that whoever holds a government position sets its policy to fulfill an electoral mandate. He must therefore give personnel management his highest priority, including cabinet level precedence. The federal government's immense bureaucracy spreads into hundreds of agencies and thousands of units and is centered in and overseen at the top by key central personnel agencies and their governing laws and regulations. The major separate personnel agencies in the national government today are the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, the Merit Systems Protection Board, MSPB, the Federal Labor Relations Authority, FLRA, and the Office of Special Counsel, OSC. Title V of the U.S. Code charges the OPM with executing, administering, and enforcing the rules, regulations, and laws governing the civil service. It grants the OPM direct responsibility for activities like retirement, pay, health, training, federal unionization, suitability, and classification functions not specifically granted to other agencies by statute. The agency's director is charged with aiding the president, as the president may request in preparing such civil service rules as the president prescribes and otherwise advising the president on actions that may be taken to promote an efficient civil service and a systematic application of the merit system principles, including recommending policies relating to the selection, promotion, transfer, performance, pay, conditions of service, tenure, and separation of employees. The MSPB is the lead adjudicator for hearing and resolving cases and controversies for 2.2 million federal employees. It is required to conduct fair and neutral case adjudications, regulatory reviews, and actions and studies to improve the workforce. Its court-like adjudications investigate and hear appeals from agency actions such as furloughs, suspensions, demotions, and terminations are appealable to the U.S. Court of Appeals. The FLRA hears appeals of agency personnel cases involving federal labor grievances procedures to provide judicial review with binding decisions appealable to appeals courts. It interprets the rights and duties of agencies and employee labor organizations on management rights, OPM integrations, recognition of labor organizations, and unfair labor practices under the general principle of bargaining in good faith and compelling need. The OSC serves as the investigator, mediator, publisher, and prosecutor before the MSPB with respect to agency and employees regarding prohibited personnel practices, Hatch Act politicization, Uniform Services Employment, and Reemployment Right Act issues, and whistleblower complaints. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, has general responsibility for reviewing charges of employee discrimination against all civil rights breaches. However, it also administers a government employee section that investigates and adjudicates federal employee complaints concerning equal employment violations as with the private sector. This makes the agency an additional de facto factor in government personnel management. While not a personnel agency per se, the General Services Administration, GSA, is charged with general supervision of contracting. Today, there are more contractors in government than there are civil service employees. The GSA must therefore be a part of any personnel management discussion. Analysis and recommendations. OPM, managing the federal bureaucracy. At the very pinnacle of the modern progressive program to make government competent stands the ideal of professionalized, Career civil service. Since the turn of the 20th century, Progressive has sought a system that could effectively select, train, reward, and guard from partisan influence the neutral scientific experts they believe are required to staff the national government and run the administrative state. Their U.S. system was initiated by the Pendleton Act of 1883 and is institutionalized by the 1930s New Deal to set principles and practices that were meant to ensure that expert merit rather than partisan favors or personal favoritism ruled within the federal bureaucracy. Yet, as public frustration with the civil service has grown, generating calls to drain the swamp, it has become clear that their project has had serious unintended consequences. The civil service was devised to replace the amateurism and presumed corruption of the old spoil system, wherein government jobs rewarded loyal partisans who might or might not have professional backgrounds. Although the system appeared to be sufficient for the nation's first century, progressive intellectuals and activists demanded a more professionalized, scientific, and political neutral administration. Progressives designed a merit system to promote expertise and shield bureaucrats from partisan political pressure, but it soon began to insulate civil servants from accountability. The modern merit system increasingly made it almost impossible to fire but the most incompetent civil servants. Complying with arcane rules regarding recruiting, rating, hiring, and firing simply replaced the goal of cultivating competence and expertise. In the 1970s, Georgia Democratic Governor Jimmy Carter, then a political unknown, ran for president supporting New Deal programs and their Great Society expansion, but opposing the way that they were being administered. The policies were not actually reducing poverty, increasing prosperity, or improving the environment, he argued, and to make them work required fundamental bureaucratic reform. He correctly charged that almost all government employees were rated as successful, all received the same pay regardless of performance, and even the worst were impossible to fire, and he won the presidency. President Carter fulfilled his campaign promise by hiring Syracuse University Dean Alan Campbell, who served first as chairman of the U.S. Civil Service Commission and then as director of the OPM, and helped him devise and pass the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, CSRA, to reset the basic structure of today's bureaucracy. A new performance appraisal system was devised with the 5 rather than 3 distribution of rating categories and individuals' goals more related to agency missions and more related to employee promotion for all. Pay and benefits were based directly on improved performance appraisals, including sizable bonuses for mid-level managers and senior executives. But time ran out on President Carter before the act could be fully executed. So it was left to President Ronald Reagan and his new OPM and agency leadership to implement. Overall, the new laws seemed to work for a few years under Reagan, but the Carter-Reagan reforms were dissipated within a decade. Today, employee evaluation is back to pre-reform levels, with almost all rated successful or above, frustrating any relation between pay and performance. An outstanding rating should be required for senior executive service chiefs to win big bonuses, but a few years ago, when it was disclosed that the Veterans Administration executives who encouraged false reporting of waiting lists for hospital admission were rated outstanding, the Senior Executive Association justified it, telling Congress that only outstanding performers will be promoted to the SES in the first place, and that precise ratings were unnecessary. The Government Accountability Office, GAO, however, has reported that pay raises within grade pay increases and locality pay for regular employees and executives have become automatic rather than based on performance as a result of most employees being rated at a similar appraisal levels. OPM, merit hiring in a merit system. It should not be impossible, even for a large national government to hire good people through merit selection. The government did so for years, but it has proven difficult in recent times to select personnel based on their knowledge, skills, and ability, KSA, as the law dictates. Yet for the past 34 years, the U.S. Civil Service has been unable to distinguish consistently between strong and unqualified applicants for employment. As the Carter presidency was winding down, the U.S. Department of Justice and top lawyers at the OPM contrived with plaintiffs to end civil service IQ examinations because of concern about their possible impact on minorities. The OPM had used the Professional and Administrative Career Examination, PACE, General Intelligence exam to select college graduates for top agency employment. But Carter administration officials, probably without the president's informed concurrence, abolished the PACE through a legal consent court decree, capitulating to demands by civil rights petitioners who contended that it was discriminatory. The judicial decree was to last only 5 years, but still controls federal hiring and is applied to all KSA tests even today. General ability tests like PACE have been used successfully to assess the usefulness and cost effectiveness of broad intellectual qualities across many separate occupations. Courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt, intentional discrimination, such results might suggest discrimination. This doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by a future administration. In any event, the federal government has been denied the use of a rigorous entry examination for 3 decades, relying instead on self-evaluations that have forced managers to resort to subterfuge, such as pre-selecting friends or associates that they believe are competent to obtain qualified employees. In 2015, President Barack Obama's OPM began to introduce an improved merit examination called USA Hire, which it had been testing quietly since 2012 in a few agencies for a dozen job descriptions. The test had multiple choice questions with only one correct answer. Some questions even required essay replies, questions that would change regularly to depress cheating. President Donald Trump's OPM planned to implement such changes, but was delayed because of legal concerns over possible disparate impact. Courts have agreed to review the consent decree if the uniform guidelines on employee selection procedures setting the technical requirements for sound exams are reformed. A government that is unable to select employees based on KSA-like test qualifications cannot work, and the OPM must move forward on this very basic personnel management obligation. The centrality of performance appraisal. In the meantime, the OPM must manage the workforce it has. Before they can reward or discipline federal employees, managers must first identify who their top performers are and who is performing less than adequately. In fact, as Ludwig von Mises proved in his classic Bureaucracy, unlike the profit and loss evaluation tool used in the private sector government, performance measurement depends totally on a functioning appraisal system. If they cannot be identified in the first place with the functioning appraisal system, it is impossible to reward good performance or correct poor performance. The problem is that collegial atmosphere of a bureaucracy and a multifaceted appraisal system that is open to appeals makes this a very challenging ideal to implement successfully. The GAO reported more recently that overly high and widely spread performance ratings were again plaguing the government, with more than 99% of employees rated fully successful or above by their managers, a mere 0.3% rated as minimally successful, and a 0.1% actually rated unacceptable. Why? It is human nature that no one appreciates being told that he or she is less than outstanding in every way. Informing subordinates in a closely knit bureaucracy that they are not performing well is difficult. Rating compatriots is even considered rude and unprofessional. Moreover, managers can be and often are accused of racial or sexual discrimination for a poor rating, and this discourages honesty. In 2018, President Trump issued Executive Order 13839, requiring agencies to reduce the time for employees to improve performance before corrective action could be taken, to initiate disciplinary actions against poorly performing employees more expeditiously, to reiterate that agencies are obligated to allegations of poor performance, to mandate that agencies remind supervisors of expiring agreements that modify an employee's personnel record, and to reevaluate procedures for agencies to discipline survivors who retaliate against whistleblowers. Unfortunately, the order was overturned by the Biden administration, so it will need to be reintroduced in 2025. The fact remains that meaningful evaluating employees' performance is a critical part of a manager's job. In the Reagan appraisal process, managers were evaluated on how they themselves rated their subordinates. This is critical to responsibility and improved management. It is essential that political executives build policy goals directly into employee appraisals, both for mission success and for employees to know what is expected. Indistinguishable from their coworkers on paper, hardworking federal employees often go unrewarded for their efforts and are often the system's greatest critics. Federal workers who are performing inadequately get neither the benefit of an honest appraisal nor clear guidance on how to improve. Political executives should take an active role in supervising performance appraisals of career staff, not unduly delegate this responsibility to senior career managers, and be willing to reward and support good performers. Merit pay. Performance appraisal means little to daily operations if it is not tied directly to real consequences for success as well as failure. According to a survey of major U.S. private companies, which, unlike the federal government, also have a profit and loss evaluation, 90% use a system of merit pay for performance based on some type of appraisal system. Despite early efforts to institute merit pay throughout the federal government, however, compensation is still based primarily on seniority rather than merit. Merit pay for executives and managers was part of the Carter reforms and was implemented early in the Reagan presidency. Beginning in the summer of 1982, the Reagan OPM entered 18 months of negotiations with House and Senate staff in extending merit pay to the entire workforce. Long and detailed talks between the OPM and both Democrats and Republicans in Congress ensued, and final agreement was reached in 1983 that supposedly ensured the passage of legislation creating a new performance management and recognition system, PMRS, for all, not just management GS13 through GS15 employees. Meanwhile, the OPM issued regulations to expand the role of performance related to pay throughout the entire workforce, but congressional allies of the employee unions, led by Representative Steny Hoyer of government employee-rich Maryland, stoutly resisted this extension of pay for performance and, with strong union support, used the congressional appropriations process to block OPM administrative pay reforms. Bonuses for SES career employees survived, but performance appraisals became so high and widely distributed that there was little relationship between performance and remuneration. Ever since the original merit pay system for federal managers, GM13 through GM15 grade levels, just below the SES, was allowed to expire in September 1993, little to nothing has been done either to reinstate the federal merit pay program for managers or to distribute performance rating evaluations for the SES, much less to extend the program to the remainder of the workforce. A reform-friendly president and Congress might just provide the opportunity to create a more comprehensive performance plan. In the meantime, however, political executives should use existing pay and especially fiscal awards strategically to reward good performance to the degree allowed by law, making the appeals process work. The non-military government dismissal rate is well below 1%, and no private sector industry employee enjoys the job security that a federal employee enjoys. Both safety and justice demand that managers learn to act strategically to hire good and fire poor performers legally. The initial paperwork required to separate poor or abusive performers when they are infrequently identified is not overwhelming, and managers might be motivated to act if it were not for the appeals and enforcement processes. Formal appeal in the private sector is mostly rather a simple two-step process, but government unions and associations have been able to convince politicians to support a multiple and extensive appeals and informants process. As noted, there are multiple administrative appeals bodies. The FLRA, OSC, and EEOC have relatively narrow jurisdictions. Claims that an employee's removal or disciplinary action violate the terms of a collective bargaining agreement between an agency and a union are handled by the FLRA. Employees who claim their removal was the result of the discrimination can appeal to the EEOC. Employees who believe their firing was retribution for being a whistleblower can go to the OSC. While the MSPB specializes in abuses of direct merit system issues, it can and does hear and review almost any of the matters heard by the other agencies. Cases involving race, gender, religion, age, pregnancy, disability, or national origin can be appealed to the EEOC or the MSPB, and in some cases to both, and to the OSC. This gives employees multiple opportunities to prove their cases, and while the EEOC, MSPB, FLRA, and OSC may all apply essentially the same burden of proof, the odds of success may be substantially different in each forum. In fact, forum shopping among them for a friendlier venue is a common practice, but frequent flyers face no consequences for frivolous complaints. As a result, meritorious cases are frequently delayed, denying relief and justice to truly aggrieved individuals. The MSPB can and does handle all such matters, but it handles and faces a backlog of an estimated 3,000 cases of people who were potentially wrongfully terminated or disciplined as far back as 2013. From 2017 through 2022, the MSPB lacked the quorum required to decide appeals. On the other hand, as of January 2023, the EEOC had a backlog of 42,000 cases. While federal employees with appeals relatively infrequently, MSPB administrative judges have upheld agency decisions as much as 80% of the time. The real problem is the time and paperwork involved in the elaborate process that managers must undergo during appeals. This keeps even the best managers from bringing cases in, but the most egregious cases of poor performance or misconduct. As a result, the MSPB, EEOC, FLRA, and OSC likely see very few cases compared to the number of occurrences, and non-performers continue to be paid and often are placed in non-work positions. Having a choice of appeals is especially unique to the government. If lower priority issues were addressed in-house, serious adverse actions would be less subject to delay. With the proper limitation of labor union actions, the FLRA should have limited reason for appeals. The EEOC's federal employee section should be transferred to the MSPB, and many of the OCS's investigatory functions should be returned to the OPM. The MSPB could then become the main reviewer of adverse actions, greatly simplifying the burdensome appeal process. Making civil service benefits economically and administratively rational, page 108 of 920. In recent years, the combined wages and benefits of the executive branch civilian workers totaled $300 billion, according to official data. But even that amount does not properly account for billions in unfunded liability for retirement and other government reporting distortions. Official data also report employment as approximately 2 million, but this ignores approximately 20 million contractors who, while not eligible for government pay and benefits, do receive them indirectly through contracting, even if they are less generous. Official data also claim that national government employees are paid less than the private sector employees are paid for similar work. But several more neutral sources demonstrate that public sector workers make more on average than private sector counterparts. All of this extravagance deserves close scrutiny. Market-based pay and benefits. According to current law, federal workers are to be paid wages comparable to equivalent private sector workers, rather than compared to all private sector employees. While the official studies claim that federal employees are underpaid relative to the private sector by 20% or more, a 2016 Heritage Foundation study found that federal employees received wages that were 22% higher than wages for similar private sector workers. If the value of employee benefits was included, the total compensation premium for federal employees over their private sector equivalents increased to between 30% and 40%. The American enterprise found a 14% pay premium and a 61% total compensation premium. Base salary is only one component of a federal employee's total compensation. In addition to high starting wages, federal employees normally receive an annual cost of living adjustment available to all employees and generous scheduled raises known as step increases. Moreover, a large proportion of federal employees are stationed in the Washington, D.C. area and other Washington cities, and are entitled to steep locality pay enhancement to account for the high cost of living in these areas. A federal employee with 5 years experience receives 20 vacation days, 13 paid sick days, and all 10 federal holidays compared to an employee at a large private company who receives 13 days of vacation and 8 paid sick days. Federal health benefits are more comparable to those provided by Fortune 500 employers, with the government paying 72% of the weighted average premiums, but this is much higher than those for most private plans. Almost half of private firms do not offer any employer contributions at all. The obvious solution to these discrepancies is to move closer to a market model for federal pay and benefits. One need is for a neutral agency to oversee pay hiring decisions, especially for high demand occupations. The OPM is independent of agency operations, so it can assess requirements more neutrally. For many years, with its special pay rates program, the OPM evaluated claims that federal rates in an area were too low to attract competent employees and allowed agencies to offer higher pay when needed, rather than increase rates for all. Ideally, the OPM should establish an initial pay schedule for every occupation and region, monitor turnover rates and applicant to position ratios, and adjust pay and recruitment on that basis. Most of this requires legislation, but the OPM should be an advocate for true equality of benefits between the public and private sectors. Referring federal retirement benefits. Career civil servants enjoy retirement benefits that are nearly unheard of in the private sector. Federal employees retire earlier, normally at age 55 after 30 years, enjoy richer pension annuities, and receive automatic cost of living adjustments based on the areas in which they retire. Defined benefit federal pensions are fully indexed for inflation, a practice that is extremely rare in the private sector. A federal employee with a pre-retirement income of $25,000 under the older of the two federal retirement plans will receive at least $200,000 more over a 20-year period than will private sector workers with the same pre-retirement salary under historic inflation levels. During the early Reagan years, the OPM reformed many specific provisions of the federal pension program to save billions administratively. Under OPM pressure, Reagan and Congress ultimately ended the old civil service retirement system entirely for new employees, which counting disbursements for the unfunded liability accounted for 51.3% of the federal government's total payroll. The retirement system that replaced it, the Federal Employees Retirement System, FERS, reduced the cost of federal employee retirement disbursements to 28.5% of payroll, including contributions to Social Security and the employer match to the thrift savings plan. Most of the pension cost was shifted to the employee, but the new system was much more equitable for the 40% who received few or no benefits under the old system. By 1999, more than half of the federal workforce was covered by the new system, and the government's per capita share of the cost as the employer was less than half the cost of the old system. 20.2% of FERS payroll versus 44.3% of CSRS payroll, representing one of the largest examples of government savings anywhere. Although the government pension system has become more like private pension systems, it still remains much more generous, and other means might be considered in the future to move it even closer to private plans. GSA, landlord and contractor management. The General Services Administration is best known as the federal government's landlord, designing, constructing, managing, and preserving government buildings, and leasing and managing outside commercial real estate, contracting with 376.9 million square feet of space. Obviously, as its prime function, real estate expertise is key to the GSA's success. However, the GSA is also the government's purchasing agent, connecting federal purchasers with commercial products and services in the private sector and their personnel management functions. With contractors performing so many functions today, the GSA therefore becomes a de facto part of government-wide personnel management. The GSA also manages the Presidential Transition Act, PTA process, which also directly involves the OPM. A recent proposal would have incorporated the OPM and GSA and OMB. Fortunately, this did not take place in that form, but it would make sense for GSA and OPM leadership and staff to hold regular meetings to work through matters of common interest, such as moderating PTA personnel restrictions and the relationship between contract and civil service employees. Reductions in force. Reducing the number of federal employees seems like an obvious way to reduce the overall expense of the civil service, and many prior administrations have attempted to do just this. Presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama began their terms, as did Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, by mandating a freeze on the hiring of new federal employees, but these efforts did not lead to permanent and substantial reductions in the number of non-defense federal employees. First, it is a challenge even to know which workers to cut. As mentioned, there are 2 million federal employees, but since budgets have exploded, so has the total number of personnel, with nearly 10 times more federal contractors than federal employees. Contractors are less expensive because they are not entitled to high government pensions or benefits that are easier to fire and discipline. In addition, millions of state governments employees work under federal grants, in effect, administering federal programs. These cannot cut directly. Cutting federal employment can be helpful and can provide a simple story to average citizens, but cutting functions, levels, funds, and grants is much more important than setting simple employment size. Simply reducing numbers can actually increase costs. OPM instructions in following President Trump's employment freeze told agencies to consider buyout programs, encouraging early retirements in order to shift costs from current budgets in agencies to the retirement system and minimize the number of personnel fired. The Environmental Protection Agency immediately implemented such a program, and OMB urged the passage of legislation to increase payout maximums from $25,000 to $40,000 to further increase spending under the cuts. President Clinton's OMBs had introduced a similar buyout that cost the Treasury $2.8 billion, mostly for those who were going to retire anyway. Moreover, when a new employee is hired to fill a job recently vacated in a buyout, the government for a time is paying two people to fill one job. What is needed at the beginning is a freeze on all top career positions hiring to prevent burrowing in by outgoing political appointees. Moreover, four factors determine the order in which employees are protected during layoffs: tenure, veterans preference, seniority, and performance in that order of importance. Despite several attempts in the House of Representatives during the Trump years to enact legislation that would modestly increase the weight given to performance over time of service, the fierce opposition by federal managers associations and unions representing long-serving but not necessarily well-performing constituents explains why the bills failed to advance. A determined president should insist that performance be first and be wary of costly types of reductions in force. Impenetrable bureaucracy. The GAO has identified almost 100 actions that the executive branch or Congress could take to improve efficiency and effectiveness across 37 areas that spread a broad range of government missions and functions. It has identified 33 actions to address mission fragmentation, overlap, and duplication in the 12 areas of defense: economic development, health, homeland security, and information technology. It has also identified 59 other opportunities for executive agencies or Congress to reduce the cost of government operations or enhance revenue collections across 25 areas of government. A logical place to begin would be to identify and eliminate functions and programs that are duplicated across cabinet departments or spread across multiple agencies. Congress hoped to help this effort by passing the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993, which required all federal agencies to define their mission, establish goals and objectives, and measure and report their performance to Congress. 3 decades of endless time-consuming reports later, the government continues to grow, but with much more paper and little change, either its performance or in the number of levels between government and the people. The Brookings Institution, Paul Light, emphasizes the importance of the increasing number of levels between the top heads of departments and the people at the bottom who receive the products of government decision-making. He estimates that are perhaps 50 or more levels of impenetrable bureaucracy and no way other than imperfect performance appraisals to communicate between them. The Trump administration proposed some possible consolidations, but these were not received favorably in Congress, whose approval is necessary for most such proposals. The best solution is to cut functions and budgets and devolve responsibilities. That is a challenge primarily for presidents, Congress, and the entire government, but the OPM still needs to lead the way government-wide in managing personnel properly, even in any future smaller government. Creating a responsible career management service. The people elect a president who is charged by Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution with seeing that the laws are faithfully executed, with its political appointees democratically linked to that legitimizing responsibility. An autonomous bureaucracy has neither independent constitutional status nor separate moral legitimacy. Therefore, career civil servants by themselves should not lead major policy changes and reforms. The creation of the Senior Executive Service was the top career change introduced by the 1978 Carter-Campbell Civil Service Reform Act. Its aim was to professionalize the career service and make it more responsible to the democratically elected commander-in-chief, and his political appointees while respecting the rights due to career employees, very much including those in the top positions. The new SES would allow management to be more flexible in filing and in filling and reassigning executive positions in locations beyond narrow specialties for more efficient mission accomplishment and will provide pay and large bonuses to motivate career performances. The desire to infiltrate political appointees improperly into the high career civil service has been widespread in every administration, whether Democrat or Republican. Democratic administrations, however, are typically more successful because they require the cooperation of careerists who generally lean heavily to the left. Such burrowing in requires career job descriptions for new positions that closely mirror the functions of a political appointee. A special hiring authority that allows the bypassing of veterans for preference, as well as other preference categories, and the ability to frustrate career candidates from taking the desired position. President Reagan's OPM began by limiting such SES burrowing in, arguing that the proper course was to create and fill political positions. This simultaneously promotes the CSRA principle of political leadership of the bureaucracy and respects the professional autonomy of the career service. But this requires that career SES employees should respect political rights too. Actions such as career staff reserving excessive numbers of key policy positions as career reserve to deny them to non-career SES employees frustrates CSRA intents. Another evasion is the general domination by career staff on SES personnel evaluation boards, the opposite of non-career executives dominating these critical meeting discussions as expected in the SES. Career training also often underplays the political role in leadership and inculcates career-first policy and value viewpoints. Frustrated with these activities by top career executives, the Trump administration issued Executive Order 13957 to make career professionals in positions that are not normally subject to change as a result of a presidential transition, but who discharge significant duties and exercise significant discretion in formulating and implementing executive branch policy and programs and exception to the competitive hiring rules and examinations for career positions under a new Schedule F. It ordered the director of OPM and agency heads to set procedures to prepare lists of such confidential policy determining policymaking or policy advocating positions and prepare procedures to create exceptions from civil service rules when careers hold such positions, from which they can relocate back to their regular civil service after such service. The order was subsequently reversed by President Biden at the demand of the Civil Service Association and unions. It should be reinstated, but SES responsibly should come first. Managing personnel in a union environment. Historically, unions were thought to be incompatible with government management. There's a natural limit to the bargaining power of private sector unions, but the financial bottom line of public sector unions is not similarly constrained. If private sector unions push too hard, a bargain can so harm a company or so reduce efficiency that their employer is forced to go out of business and eliminate union jobs altogether. There is no such limit in government, which cannot go out of business, so demands can be excessive without negatively affecting employee and union bottom lines. Even Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt considered union representation in the federal government to be incompatible with democracy. Striking and even threats of bargaining and delay were considered an act against the people and thus improper. It was not until President John F. Kennedy that union representation in the federal government was recognized, and then merely by executive order. Labor bargaining was not set in statute until the Carter administration was forced by Congress to do so in order to pass the CSRA, although all bargaining was placed under OPM review. The CSRA was able to maintain strong management rights for the OPM and agencies and forbade collective bargaining on pay and benefits as well as management prerogatives. Over time, OPM, FLRA, and agencies' personnel offices and courts, especially in Democratic administrations, narrowed management rights so that labor bargaining expanded as management rights contracted. But the management rights are still in statute and have been enforced by some administrations and should be enforced by any future OPM and agency managements, which should not be intimidated by union power. Rather than being daunted, President Trump issued 3 executive orders. Executive Order 13836, encouraging agencies to renegotiate all union collective bargaining agreements to ensure consistency with the law and respect for management rights. Executive Order 13837, encouraging agencies to prevent union representatives from using official time, preparing or pursuing grievances, or from engaging in other union activity on government time. And Executive Order 13839, encouraging agencies to limit labor grievances on removals from service or on challenging performance appraisals and to prioritize performance over seniority when deciding who should be retained following reductions in force. All were revoked by the Biden administration and should be reinstated by the next administration to include the immediate appointment of the FLRA General Counsel and reactivation of the impasses panel. Congress should also consider whether public sector unions are appropriate in the first place. The bipartisan consensus up until the middle of the 20th century held that these unions were not compatible with constitutional government. After more than half a century of experience with public sector union frustrations of good government management, it is hard to avoid reaching the same conclusion. Fully staffing the ranks of political appointees. The president must rely legally on his top department and agency officials to run the government and on top of White House staff employees, to coordinate operations through regular cabinet and other meetings and communications. Without this political leadership, the career civil service becomes empowered to lead the executive branch without democratic legitimacy. While many obstacles stand in his way, a president is constitutionally and statutorily required to fill the top political positions in the executive branch, both to assist him and to provide overall legitimacy. Most presidents have had some difficulty obtaining congressional approval of their appointees, but this has worsened recently. After the 2016 election, President Trump faced special hostility from the opposition party and the media in getting his appointees confirmed or even considered by the Senate. His early Office of Presidential Personnel, PPO, did not generally remove political appointees from the previous administration, but instead relied mostly on prior political appointees and career civil servants to run the government. Such a reliance on holdovers and bureaucrats led to a lack of agency control and the absolute refusal of acting government general from the Obama administration to obey a direct order from the president. Under the early PPO, the Trump administration appointed fewer political appointees in its first few moments in office than had been appointed in any recent presidency, partly because of historical high partisan congressional obstructions, but also because several officials announced that they preferred fewer political appointees and agencies as a way to cut federal spending. Whatever the reasoning, this had the effect of permanently hampering the rollout of the new president's agenda. Thus, in those critical early years, much of the government relied on senior careerists and holdover Obama appointees to carry out the sensitive responsibilities that would otherwise belong to the new president appointees. Fortunately, the later PPO, OPM, and Senate leadership began to cooperate to build a strong team to implement the president's personnel appointment agenda. Any new administration will be wise to learn that it will need a full cadre of sound political appointees from the beginning if it expects to direct this enormous federal bureaucracy. A close relationship between the PPO at the White House and the OPM, coordinating with agency assistant secretaries of administration and PPOs chosen. White House's liaisons and their staff at each agency is essential to the management of this large, multi-level, resistant, and bureaucratic challenge. If personnel as policy is to be our general guide, it would make sense to give the president direct supervision of the bureaucracy with the OPM director available in his cabinet. A reformed bureaucracy. Today, the federal government's bureaucracy cannot even meet its own civil service ideals. The merit criteria of ability, knowledge, and skills are no longer the basis for recruitment, selection, or advancement, while pay and benefits for comparable work are substantially above those in the private sector. Retention is not based primarily on performance, and for the most part, inadequate performance is not appraised, corrected, or punished. The authors have made many suggestions here that, if implemented, could bring that bureaucracy more under control and enable it to work more efficiently and responsibly, which is especially required for the half of civilian government that administers its undeniable responsibilities for defense and foreign affairs. While a better administered central bureaucracy is crucial for both those and domestic responsibilities, the problem of properly running the government goes beyond civil bureaucratic administration. The specific deficiencies of the federal bureaucracy, size, levels of organization, inefficiency, expense, and lack of responsiveness to political leadership, are rooted in the progressive ideology that unelected experts can and should be trusted to promote the general welfare in just about every area of social life. The Constitution, however, reserved a few enumerated powers to the federal government while leaving the great majority of domestic activities to state, local, and private governance. As James Madison explained, the powers reserved to several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Modern progressive politics has simply given the national government more to do than the complex separation of powers Constitution allows. That progressive system has broken down in our time, and the only real solution is for the national government to do less, to decentralize and privatize as much as possible, and then ensure that the remaining bureaucracy is managed effectively along the lines of the enduring principles set out in detail here. So that was the end of chapter 3, Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promises. The end notes on page 84, page 85. Section 2, the Common Defense. While the lives of Americans are affected in noteworthy ways, for better or worse, by each part of the executive branch, the inherent importance of national defense and foreign affairs makes the Departments of Defense and State first among equals. Originating in the George Washington administration, the War Department, as it was then known, was headed by Henry Knox, America's chief artillery officer in the Revolutionary War. Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, was the Secretary of State. Despite such long and storied histories, neither department was currently living up to its standards, and the success of the next presidency will be determined in part by whether they can be significantly improved in short order. Ever since our founding, former acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller writes in chapter 4, Americans have understood that the surest way to avoid war is to be prepared for it in peace. Yet the Department of Defense is a deeply troubled institution. It has emphasized leftist politics over military readiness. Recruiting was the worst part in 2022 that it has been in 2 generations. And the Biden administration's profoundly unserious equity agenda and vaccine mandates have taken a serious toll. Additionally, Miller writes that the atrophy of our defense industrial base, the impact of sequestration, and effective disarmament by many U.S. allies have exacted a high toll on America's military. Moreover, our military has adopted a risk averse culture. Think of mass soldiers, sailors, and airmen rather than instilling and rewarding courage in thought and action. The good news is that most enlisted personnel and most officers, especially below the rank of general or admiral, continue to be a patriotic defenders of liberty. But this is now Barack Obama's General Officer Corps. That is why Russ Vought argues in Chapter 2 that the National Security Council should rigorously review all general and flag officer promotions to prioritize the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense related matters, including climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism, and other polarizing policies that weaken our armed forces and encourage our nation's finest men and women from enlisting. Ensuring that many of America's best and brightest continue to choose military service is essential. By far, the most significant danger to America from abroad, Miller writes, is China. That communist regime is undertaking a historic military buildup, which could result in a nuclear force that matches or exceeds America's own nuclear arsenal. Resisting Chinese expansionist aims requires a denial defense whereby we make the subordination of Taiwan or other U.S. allies in Asia prohibitively difficult. However, Miller adds that critically, the United States must be able to do this at a cost and risk that Americans are willing to bear. The best gauge of such willingness is congressionally approval. Accordingly, we must rediscover and adhere to the founders' wise division of war powers, whereby Congress, the most representative and deliberative branch, decides whether to go to war, and the executive, the most energetic and decisive branch, decides how to carry it out once begun. As the past 75 years have repeatedly demonstrated in different ways, from Korea to Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, we depart from our constitutional design at our peril. Miller writes that we must treat missile defense as a top priority, ensure that most of our weapons are made in America, reform the budgeting process, and sustain an efficient and effective counterterrorism enterprise. Across all of our efforts, we must keep in mind that part of our peace through strength is knowing when to fight. As George Washington warned nearly 2 centuries ago, we must continue to be on guard against being drawn into conflicts that do not justify great loss of American treasure or significant shedding of American blood. At the same time, we must be prepared to defend our interests and meet challenges where and when they arise. An effective diplomatic corps is central to defending our interests in influencing world events. Whereas most military personnel have had leftist priorities imposed from above, the problem at stake comes largely from within. Former State Department Director of Policy Planning, Kieran Skinner, writes in Chapter 6, large swaths of the State Department's workforce are left-wing and predisposed to disagree with the conservative president policy agenda and vision. She adds that the department possesses a belief that it is an independent institution that knows what it is best for the United States, sets its own foreign policy, and does not need direction from an elected president, a view that does not align with the Constitution. The solution to this problem is strong political leadership, Skinner writes. The next administration must take swift and decisive steps to reforge the department into a lean and functional diplomatic machine that serves the president and thereby the American people. Because the Senate has been extraordinarily lax in fulfilling its constitutional obligation to confirm presidential appointees, she recommends putting appointees into acting roles until such time as the Senate confirms them. Skinner writes that states should also stop skirting the Constitution treaty, making requirements and stop enforcing agreements as treaties. It should encourage more trade with allies, particularly with Great Britain, and less with adversaries. And it should implement a sovereign Mexico policy, as our neighbor has functionally lost its sovereignty to muscular criminal cartels that effectively run the country. In Africa, Skinner writes, the U.S. should focus on one core security, economic and human rights, rather than impose radical abortion and pro-LGBT initiatives. Divisive symbols such as the rainbow flag or the Black Lives Matter flag have no place next to the stars and stripes at our embassies. When it comes to China, Skinner writes that a policy of compete where we must, but cooperate where we can, has demonstrably failed. The People's Republic of China, PRC, aggressive behavior, she writes, can only be curbed through external pressure. Efforts to protect or excuse China must stop. She observes many were quick to dismiss even the possibility that COVID escaped from a Chinese research laboratory. Meanwhile, Skinner writes, global leaders, including President Joe Biden, have tried to normalize or even laud Chinese behavior. She adds, in some cases, these voices like global corporate giants BlackRock and Disney, or the National Basketball Association, NBA, directly benefit from doing business with Beijing. Former Vice President of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, Maura Namdar, writes in Chapter 8 that we need to have people working for USAGM who actually believe in America, rather than allowing the agencies to function as anti-American taxpayer-funded entities that parrot our adversaries' propaganda and talking points. Former Acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli, says in Chapter 5 that the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, a creation of the George W. Bush era, should be closed, as it has added needless additional bureaucracy and expense without corresponding benefit. He recommends that it be replaced with a new standalone border and immigration agency at the cabinet level, and that the remaining parts of DHS be distributed among other departments. Former Chief of Staff for the Director of National Intelligence, Dustin Carmack, writes in Chapter 7 that the U.S. intelligence community is too inclined to look in the rearview mirror, engage in groupthink, and employ an overly cautious approach aimed at personal approval rather than at offering the most accurate, unvarnished intelligence for the benefit of the country. And in Chapter 9, former acting Deputy Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Matt Primerick, asserts that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, must be reformed, rewriting. The Biden administration has deformed the agency by treating it as a global platform to pursue overseas a divisive political and cultural agenda that promotes abortion, climate extremism, gender radicalism, and interventions against perceived systematic racism. If the recommendations in the following chapters are adopted, what Skinner says about the State Department could be true for other parts of the federal government's national security and foreign policy apparatus. The next conservative president has the opportunity to restructure the making and execution of U.S. defense and foreign policy and reset the nation's role in the world. The recommendations outlined in this section provide guidance on how the next president should use the federal government's vast resources to do just that. Page 122 of 920, page 90 in the Project 2025 Mandate for Full Leadership. Quick intermission before Chapter 4, Department of Defense, Christopher Miller, the Constitution in reading. So we're going to take a brief intermission, and in that intermission, Project 2025 in the Random Acts of Kindness community of CCC Because We Care Foundation. This transformative community, we invite you to join us in recommending and celebrating Acts of Kindness September 11th, 2024. So on Independence Day, July 4th, 2024, Adriane Mayes, president of CCC Because We Care Foundation, is performing a unique acts of kindness by reading the verbatim 900-page Mandate for Leadership document. This significant text covers essential topics on future wealth creation, financial insights, health and wellness, community changes, adjustments in travel, and the impact of artificial intelligence. Adriane will read directly from the direct document without adding any personal opinions or ad-libs, ensuring the information is presented clearly and accurately. This live reading aims to empower, model, and showcase dedication to community service and truth-telling. So in the community for Project 2025 in 60 seconds, what is one thing that you can share with someone as a random act of kindness to give them knowledge about Project 2025? So that is the comment that I would like you to leave there. And you can think there at home if you're not in the community as of yet. Write down one thing that you may have learned in this Project 2025 reading, about a little over an hour in. Brief intermission. So I'll be right back with you. Go ahead and jump into the community and get writing to your one act of kindness comment. Thank you for the delays. Brief intermission while we're reading Project 2025 900-page mandate for live leadership. Live, part 2 with Adriane Mayes, president of CCC Because We Care Foundation. Welcome back. And we're tuning in live to go ahead the random acts of kindness here in the state of Michigan. I'm here in Canton, Michigan, outside of Detroit, Michigan. What up, though? And as the captain of the Detroit ChatGPT revolution and building on this artificial intelligence, Project 2025 and the 900-page mandate for leadership live, part 2, literacy and reading in the state of Michigan is one of the lowest in the nation. So the random act of kindness on this Independence Day, July 4th, 2024, freedom to be free, to be Adriane Mayes, to be me, is to be different, think different, and to help people and to empower and model and innovate and help them prosper. And in order to prosper and understand how to build wealth and financial education, travel experiences, health and wellness, even with AI marketing education and taking all of those experiences and building together your billionaire wealth plan, you have to understand what happened in the past, your present, and where we're going. And Project 2025 was introduced a couple of days or last week when Joe Biden and Donald Trump were actually in debate for our future election, which will be held in November of 2024. And but actually in listening to and watching the BET Awards in 2024 with Taraji P Henson hosting, doing an amazing job, actually mentioned Project 2025, which piqued the interest to be able to go and do the research and see what is this Project 2025 all about. And in doing the research and diving a little bit deeper in regards to the information, finding out it's a 900-page document, and any person may be intimidated by the actual presentation of information, decided on this Independence Day, freedom to be free, Adriane Mayes, AI genius, thought at maybe around 10:35, like, hey, what about reading the Project 2025, not just for me, but out loud to help other people that maybe not be able to read this actual document, let alone put through the process, and then break it up into 60-second segments where people can actually take it in bite-sized pieces. So that's going to be step 2 of this process. But step 1 is reading live Project 2025, the 900-page mandate for leadership, part 2. So you can catch part 1 on YouTube at Adriane Mayes, as it is already there. And we're going to jump into part 2 as we were in the Random Acts of Kindness community during the actual break. And we've had the opportunity to now go back into the mandate for leadership. How you can actually find this document is just simply going into the community. And we're going to go back into chapter 4, picking up where we left off. Page 123 of 920, Department of Defense, Christopher Miller. The Constitution requires the federal government to provide for the common defense. It assigns the Congress the authority to raise and support armies and to provide and maintain a navy, and specifies that the president is commander-in-chief of America's armed forces. Ever since our founding, Americans have understood that the surest way to avoid war is to be prepared for it in peace. But when deterrence fails, we must fight and win. The Department of Defense, DoD, is the largest part of our federal government. It has almost 3 million people serving in uniform or a civilian capacity throughout the world and consumes approximately $850 billion annually, more than 50% of our government's discretionary spending. The DoD is also a deeply troubled institution. Historically, the military has been one of America's most trusted institutions, but years of sustained misuse, a two-tiered culture of accountability that shields senior officers and officials while exposing junior officers and soldiers in the field, wasteful spending, wildly shifting security policies, exceedingly poor discipline and program execution, and most recently, the Biden administration's profoundly unserious equity agenda and vaccine mandates have taken a serious toll. Our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, our impossibly muddled China strategy, the growing involvement of senior military officers in the political arena, and the confusion about the purpose of our military are clear signals of a disturbing decay and markers of a dangerous decline in our nation's capabilities and will. Additionally, more than 100,000 Americans die annually in large measure because of illicit narcotics flows, more than 4 times as many people in 1 year as we lost in 20-year loss against Al Qaeda. We also are witnessing a transformation in the character of war. The democratization of technology and the collapse of time and space require dramatic, thoughtful changes in how we defend, deter, and fight. As with any huge bureaucracy, and the DoD is one of the world's largest, breaking the status quo requires leadership and endurance. Technology is critical to maintaining our warfighting primacy, but we must be leery of the siren song that technology alone can protect us. More important is how new technologies are developed, tested, procured, and used, and that relies on the true competitive advantages of our people, ingenuity, common sense, and thoughtfulness grounded in a free society. Because war will continue to be the most stressful and consequential human endeavor, the most powerful weapon systems will remain the 6 inches between the ears of our citizens and the strength of their hearts and content of their souls. Military service is the most difficult task we ask of our citizens, and our nation is enormously blessed that so many young, patriotic Americans eagerly volunteer to carry such a heavy burden. We owe them everything, and we must do better. To do better, however, means recognizing and implementing 4 overriding priorities. Priority number 1, reestablishing a culture of command, accountability, non-politicization, and warfighting focus. Priority number 2, transform our armed forces for maximum effectiveness in an era of great power competition. Priority number 3, provide necessary support to the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Border Protection Operations. Border protection is a national security issue that requires sustained attention and effort by all elements of the executive branch. Priority number 4, demand financial transparency and accountability. This chapter offers recommendations for improving our armed forces and the civilian organizations that support and oversee them. DoD policy. By far the most significant danger to American security, freedoms, and prosperity is China. China is by any measure the most powerful state in the world other than the United States itself. It apparently aspires to dominate Asia and then from that position become globally preeminent. If Beijing could achieve this goal, it could dramatically undermine America's core interests, including by restricting U.S. access to the world's most important market. Preventing this from happening must be the top priority for American foreign and defense policy. Beijing presents a challenge to American interests across the domains of national power, but the military threat it poses is especially acute and significant. China is undertaking a historic military buildup that includes increasing capability for power projection not only in its own region, but also far beyond, as well as dramatic expansion of its nuclear forces that could result in a nuclear force that matches or exceeds America's own nuclear arsenal. The most severe immediate threat that Beijing's military poses, however, is to Taiwan and other U.S. allies along the first island chain in the Western Pacific. If China could subordinate Taiwan or allies like the Philippines, South Korea, and Japan, it could break any balancing coalition that is designed to prevent Beijing's hegemony over Asia. Accordingly, the United States must ensure that China does not secede. This requires a denial defense. the ability to make the subordination of Taiwan or other U.S. allies in Asia prohibitively difficult. Critically, the United States must be able to do this at a level of cost and risk that Americans are willing to bear given the relative importance of Taiwan to China and to the U.S. The United States and its allies also face real threats from Russia, as evidenced by Vladimir Putin's brutal war in Ukraine, as well as from Iran, North Korea, and transnational terrorism at a time when decades of ill advised military operations in the greater Middle East, the atrophy of our defense and industrial base, the impact of sequestration, and effective disarmament of many U.S. allies have exacted a high toll on Americans' military. This is a grim landscape. The United States needs to deal with these threats forthrightly and with strength, but it also needs to be realistic. It cannot wish away these problems. Rather, it must confront them with a clear eyed recognition of the need for choice, discipline, and adequate resources for defense. In this light, U.S. defense strategy must identify China unequivocally as the top priority for U.S. defense planning while modernizing and expanding U.S. nuclear arsenal and sustaining an efficient and effective counterterrorism enterprise. U.S. allies must also step up, with some joining the United States in taking on China in Asia, while others take more of a lead in dealing with threats from Russia in Europe, Iran, the Middle East, and North Korea. The reality is that achieving these goals will require more spending on defense, both by the United States and by its allies, as well as active support for reindustrialization and more support for allies' productive capacity so that we can scale our free world efforts together. Needed reforms. Prioritize the denial of defense against China. U.S. defense planning should focus on China and, in particular, the effective denial of defense of Taiwan. This focus and priority for U.S. defense activities will deny China the first island chain. Require that all U.S. defense efforts, from force planning to employment and posture, focus on ensuring the ability of American forces to prevail in the pacing scenario and deny China a fait accompli against Taiwan. Number two, prioritize the U.S. conventional force planning, construct to defeat a Chinese invasion of Taiwan before allocating resources to other missions, such as simultaneously fighting another conflict. Increased allied conventional defense burden sharing. U.S. allies must take for greater responsibility for their conventional defense. U.S. allies must play their part not only in dealing with China, but also in dealing with threats from Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Number one, make burden sharing a central part of U.S. defense strategy, with the United States not just helping allies to step up, but strongly encourage them to do so. Number two, supporting greater spending and collaboration by Taiwan allies in the Asia Pacific, like Japan and Australia, to create a collective defense model. Number three, transform NATO so that U.S. allies are capable of fielding the great majority of the conventional forces required to deter Russia while relying on the United States primarily for our nuclear deterrence, and select other capabilities while reducing the U.S. force posture in Europe. Sustain support for Israel, even as America empowers Gulf partners to take responsibility for their own coastal, air, and missile defenses, both individually and working collectively. Number five, enable South Korea to take the lead in its conventional defense against North Korea. Implement nuclear modernization and expansion. The United States manifestly needs to modernize, adapt, and expand its nuclear arsenal. Russia maintains its actively brandishing a very large nuclear arsenal, but China is also undertaking a historic nuclear breakout. Number one, expand and modernize the U.S. nuclear force so that it has the same size, sophistication, and tailoring to deter Russia and China simultaneously. Number two, develop a nuclear arsenal with the size, sophistication, and tailoring, including new capabilities at the theater level, to ensure that there is no circumstances in which America is exposed to serious nuclear coercion. Increased allied counterterrorist burden sharing. Transnational terrorism remains a threat to Americans even as we pivot towards Asia. Number one, sustain the military forces needed to deter, prevent, and combat terrorism, but at a sustainable cost in concert with other elements of national power and partner efforts. Number two, prioritize enhancing the capability of allies and partners to take the lead in combating terrorism in their regions. DoD acquisition and sustainment, ANS. The DoD's ability to acquire and field new and existing technologies is essential to the ability of America's military personnel to fight and win our nation's wars. To succeed in this endeavor, we must optimize the systems and personnel that the department uses. But the inflexible bureaucratic structure and risk-averse culture that have developed over the decades make it difficult to provide the tools that warfighters need at the speed of relevance. The number one problem is the DoD budgeting process instituted in 1961 that requires acquisition spending to be locked years in advance. Because technologies changes so rapidly and requirements can change overnight, this creates a situation in which military personnel not only go to war with outdated technology, but also may be fighting with equipment that is less capable than that of their competitors. America owes military many things, and the most important is the resources they need to survive on the battlefield and carry out the tasks we ask them. Needed reforms. Reform the planning, reprogramming, budgeting, and execution, PPBE process. Number one, it's enhanced funding and authority for DoD mission focused innovation organizations and away from program specific stovepipes that planned for and designed 2 or 3 years earlier may no longer be relevant. This allows the acquisition community to focus on portfolio management and move money around more easily instead of locked into inflexible multi-year procurement cycles. Number two, the president should examine the recommendations of the congressional mandated Commission on Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution Reform in developing a strategy for implementing those that the administration considers to be in the best interest of the American people. The Commission's final report is due on September 1st, 2023. Number three, develop legislation or other means of providing funding outside the traditional PBBE process for the prototyping and experimentation of the emerging technologies that are deemed essential to modernization and future conflict, considering creating a fast track for projects that satisfy the most pressing national security needs. Number four, require the Undersecretary of the Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and all service secretaries to conduct the night courts and use existing authority to terminate outdated or underperforming programs so that money can be used for what works and what will work. Require the undersecretaries and service secretaries to brief the secretary annually on the results. Number five, require the Office of Secretary of the Defense to research and report on the acquisition processes used by America's adversaries to improve our understanding of how they are often able to innovate and field new technologies on a faster timeline. Strengthen Americans' defense industrial base. Number one, replenish and maintain U.S. stockpiles of ammunition and other equipment that have been depleted as a result of U.S. support to Ukraine. This will strengthen defense industry supply chain and ensure that adequate inventory exists if it is needed for a future conflict. Number two, collaborate with industry to develop a prioritized list of reforms that the DoD and Congress can enact and implement to incentivize industry to help America's military innovate and field needed capabilities. Number three, strengthen the ability of acquisition authorities to engage in multi-year procurements and block buys. This will improve private sector rates of return, thereby incentivizing defense contractors to partner with the government. It will also reduce government overhead by reducing the number of procurement competitions. Prioritize the U.S. and allies under the domestic end product and domestic components requirements of the Buy America Act. Currently, defense companies are required to manufacture defense items for the U.S. government that are 100% domesticated, produced, and at least 50% composed of domestically produced components. However, there are loopholes that allow companies to manufacture these items overseas. This can create supply chain and other issues, especially in wartime. Manufacturing components and end products domestically and with allies spur factory development, increases American jobs, and builds resilience in American defense industrial base. Number five, review the sectors currently prioritized for onshoring or friendshoring of manufacturing, kinetic capabilities, castings and forgings, critical materials, microelectronics, space, and electric vehicle batteries. Evaluate them accordingly to the strategic landscape and expand or reprioritize the list as appropriate. Help small businesses to become medium-sized and large vendors, which encourages a more resilient industrial base and fosters competition. Encourage and plan for durable supply chains for small businesses so they also have commercial private sector customers and are not solely dependent on defense orders, which can be highly specialized, expensive, and irregular. Increase external engagement among small businesses to inform them of DoD's needs and how they could work with DoD to meet national security priorities. Optimize the DoD acquisition community. Create incentives to emphasize speed and agility in decision-making for prototyping and program of record starts and terminations. Most bureaucrats would rather follow a checklist and fail than go outside the procedures and win because failure means negative career repercussions. Senior acquisition leaders should design a system that allows decision makers to stay within the law but bypass unnecessary departmental regulations that are not in the best interest of the government and hamper the acquisition of capabilities that warfighters require. Number two, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Undersecretary for Research and Engineering and all service secretaries should assess their acquisition workforces, determine what additional personnel, resources, and training they need, and develop implementation plans. The goal is to develop, prototype, acquire, and field required capabilities at the speed of relevance to meet America's pacing threats and maintain a warfighting advantage. Number three, Decentralized Defense Acquisition University, DAU. Offerings and expand the DAU mission to include accreditation of non-DoD institutions. The critical shortage of trained and certified acquisition personnel must be addressed with urgency in order to support DoD mission objectives and goals. With the rapid evolution of training and educational technologies, including remote and virtual practices, there is no reason for DAU to maintain a monopoly on the knowledge and certification that are required to perform as acquisition professionals. Further, the cost to private contractors and non-DoD civilians who aspire to such a role limits the supply of trained and certified candidates. DAU has become an unnecessary barrier to entry in a career field that is vital to the DoD mission. DoD Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation, RDT&E. The FY 2017 National Defense Authorization Act established the position of Undersecretary of Defense for research and engineering and assign broad responsibility for all defense research and engineering, technology development, technology transition, prototyping, experimentation, and developmental testing activities and programs, including the allocation of resources for defense research and engineering and unifying defense research and engineering efforts across the department, to the new undersecretary, who also was tasked with serving as the principal advisor to the secretary on all research, engineering, and technology development activities and programs in the department. This led to the single largest DoD structural change since the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986 and was organized effectively during President Donald Trump's administration. Needed reforms: champion, engage, and focus the American innovation ecosystem. To maintain leadership in the era of greater power competition and succeed against our adversaries, a key DoD effort must be the creation of mechanisms and processes to embrace America's most significant competitive advantage, innovation. Engage and leverage all of America's scientific, engineering, and high-tech production communities to research, develop, and prototype and rapidly deploy advanced technology capabilities on a continuing basis to preserve our warfighting advantage. Increase integration and collaboration among the DoD government labs and private companies to solve the department's most difficult problems. Reduce the number of critical technology areas from 14 to a more manageable number to concentrate effort and resources on those that bear directly on great power competition. Rebuild RDT&E infrastructure that resides in Cold War era facilities and is not well suited to the current era of rapid development and testing of advanced technology and concepts to maturity level necessary for acquisition and operational fielding. Number 5, move toward a much more comprehensive independent risk reduction approach to increase understanding of the technical risks by drawing on the expertise in DoD laboratories and agencies to help acquisition programs succeed. Improve the rapid deployment of technology in the battlefield. America's military advantage has derived from the professionalism of our service members and our ability to manifest our technological advance and battlefield capability. The current era of great power competition will continue for the foreseeable future, and technology will be the currency of competition. Our ability to prevail will rest on our ability to develop new technologies and move them on to the battlefield more rapidly than our adversaries can. Number 1, accelerate the prototyping cycle to meet immediate battlefield needs. Number 2, require tighter integration with user communities to provide value. Number 3, establish a pipeline of near-term, mid-term, and long-term technology that is aimed at great power competition, China, and can be matured, prototyped, and evaluated to support major acquisitions. The ability to produce at scale, to break the cycle of schedule delays and cost overruns from underdeveloped and poorly understood technologies. Develop a framework to protect the RDT&E enterprise from foreign exploitation. Strategic competition and adaptive adversaries require new thinking about how to protect technology. China has been relentless in stealing U.S. technology, using the full range of measures from influence operations to outright theft. This has been a major factor in its ability to close the gap and in some cases to exceed U.S. capabilities. Number 1, implement a comprehensive approach to preserving U.S. technological leadership that is based on outpacing our adversaries, clear about what we need to protect, tailored to various specific sectors, for example, academia, the defense industrial base, and laboratories, and underpinned with a full range of consequences for attempted or actual theft. DoD foreign military sales. The United States must regain its role as the arsenal of democracy. In fiscal year FY 2021, United States government foreign military sales, FMS, none nosedived to a low of 34.8 billion from a record high of 55.7 billion in 2018, fiscal year 2018. This decrease hinders interoperability with partners and allies, decreases defense industrial base capacity, and increases the taxpayer burden on the U.S. military's own procurements. Under previous administrations, the United States built its reputation as a reliable partner with a strong defense industrial base that could apply military articles and goods in a timely manner. Today, FMS process is encumbered by Byzantine bureaucracy, long contracting times, high cost, and mundane technology. The United States can change this downward trajectory by improving internal processes that incentivize partners and allies to procure U.S. defense systems, thereby expanding our defense ecosystem. We must reverse the recent dip in FMS to ensure both that our partners remain interoperable with the United States and that our defense industrial base regains much needed capacity in preparation for future challenges. Needed reforms. Emphasize exportability with U.S. procurements. The record low FMS sales in 2021 were driven partly by the high cost of converting weapon systems on the back end of production rather than emphasizing exportability in initial capability planning. Number one, ensure that senior U.S. military leadership emphasizes exportability in the initial development of defense systems that are both available and interoperable with our partners and allies. Number two, create a funding mechanism to incentivize exportability and initial planning, which can be recouped after future FMS transaction. Informal congressional notification. Informal congressional notification or tiered review is a hindrance to ensuring timely sales to our global partners. The tiered review process is not codified in law. It is merely a practice by which the Department of State provides a preview of prospective arms transfers before Congress is formally notified. In the tiered review process to eliminate at least 20 days from the FMS process. Number two, use the tiered review process only when unanimously congressional support is guaranteed in order to eliminate the weaponization by select members of Congress that has prevented billions of dollars of arms sales from moving into formal congressional notification. Minimize barriers to collaboration. The high cost of developing advanced defense platforms requires the United States to collaborate with key allies to minimize waste, complement strengths, and supplement our defense industrial base to create a system that is greater than that of the United States alone. Number one, enhance defense industrial base planning with partners to allow them to focus on niche areas where there are cost advantages for the United States. Number two, decrease international traffic in arms regulations, ITAR, to facilitate trade with such allies as the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Number three, create opportunities to improve the health of the defense supply chain with added opportunities for partners and allies to contribute. Reform the FMS contracting process. The contracting timeline for the FMS process is shockingly slow. On average, the DoD contracting timeline takes approximately 18 months because of slow bureaucratic processes and chronic understaffing. Number one, immediately fund more contracting capacity in all services to decrease the contracting timeline and improve the delivery of defense articles to our global partners. Number two, rationalize and speed arms sales decision-making to preclude our enemies from exploiting bureaucratic slothfulness and allow us to manage the development of indigenous defense industrial bases. DoD personnel. The men and women of America's armed forces are the most critical component of our national defense strategy. But in recent years, they have been overextended, undervalued, and sufficiently resourced. Their families help them to carry the burden of service, but the assistance they receive is disproportionately less than the sacrifices they make. Young civilians who would thrive in a military environment are disenfranchised when educators and influencers discourage them from learning about military service and preparing for the honor of wearing America's uniform. The United States military is an extraordinary institution staffed by exceptional people who have defended our nation and changed the course of history. But the Biden administration, through word and deed, has treated the armed forces as just another place to work. We must restore our military to a place of honor and respect and recruit and retain individuals who meet the rigorous standards of excellence that are required for membership in the world's greatest fighting force. Needed reforms: rescue recruiting and retention. Recruiting was the worst in 2022 that it has been in 2 generations and is expecting to be even worse in 2023. Some of the problems are self-inflicted and ongoing. The recruiting problem is not service specific, it affects the entire joint force. Number one, appoint a special assistant to the president who will maintain liaison with Congress, DOD, and all other interested parties on the issue of recruiting and retention. Number two, improve recruiting by suspending the use of the recently introduced MHS Genesis system that uses private medical records of potential recruits at private interest processing stations, MPPS, creating unnecessary delays and unwarranted rejection. One brief moment as the random acts of kindness, quick pause. One moment, please. Thank you. Number three, improve military recruiters' access to secondary schools and require completion of the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, ASVAB, the military entrance examination by all students in schools that receives federal funding. Number four, encourage members of Congress to provide time to military recruiters during each town hall session in their congressional districts. Number five, increase the number of junior ROTC programs in secondary schools. Restore standards of lethality and excellence. Entrance criteria for military service in specific occupational career fields should be based on the needs of those positions. Exceptions for individuals who are already predisposed to require medical treatment. For example, HIV positive or suffering from gender dysphoria should be removed, and those with gender dysphoria should be expelled from military service. Physical fitness requirements should be based on the occupational field without consideration of gender, race, ethnicity, or orientation. Eliminate politicization, reestablish trust and accountability, and restore faith to the force. In 2021, the Reagan National Defense Survey found that only 45% of Americans have a great deal of trust and confidence in the military, down from 70% in 2018. Number one, strengthen protections for chaplains to carry out their ministry according to the tenets of their faith. Number two, codify language to instruct senior military officers, 3 and 4 stars, to make certain that they understand their primary duty to be ensuring the readiness of the armed forces, not pursuing a social engineering agenda. This direction should be enforced during the Senate confirmation process. Orders and direction motivated by purely partisan motives should be identified as threats to readiness. Number 3, reinstate service members to active duty who are discharged for not receiving the COVID vaccine, restore their appropriate rank, and provide back pay. Number 4, eliminate Marxist indoctrination and divisive critical race theory programs and abolish newly established diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and staff. Number 5, restrict the use of social media solely for purposes of recruitment and discipline any armed services personnel who use an official command channel to engage with civilian critics on social media. Number 6, audit the course offerings at military academias to remove our Marxist indoctrinations, eliminate tenure for academic professionals, and apply the same rules to instructors that are applied to other DoD contracting personnel. Number 7, reverse policies that allow transgender individuals to serve in the military. Gender dysphoria is incompatible with the demands of military service, and the use of public monies for transgender surgeries or to facilitate abortion for service members should be ended. Value the military family. Military service requires extreme sacrifices by families. Number 1, support legislation to increase wages and family allowances for active duty enlisted personnel. No uniformed personnel should ever have to rely on social benefits, like as food stamps or public housing assistance. Number 2, improve base housing and consider the military family holistically when considering change of station moves. Number 3, improve spouse employment opportunities and protections, including licensing reform and expand childcare. Number 4, audit all curricula and health policies in DoD schools for military families, remove all inappropriate materials, and reverse inappropriate policies. Number 5, support legislation giving education savings account options to military families. Reduce the number of generals. Rank creep is pervasive. The number of 0 to 6 to 0 to 9 officers is at an all-time high across the armed services, above World War II levels. And the actual battlefield experience of this office corps is at an all-time low. The next president should limit the continued advancement of many of the existing cadre, many of whom have been advanced by prior administrations for reasons other than their warfighting prowess. DoD intelligence. Our national defense establishment must evolve to meet the rapid, profound, and dynamic change in the global landscape, but absent significant effort to evaluate and retool in critical areas, including our intelligence and security portfolios. America's competitive advantage against rivals and adversaries is at serious risk. However, for any structural changes to succeed, The crisis in our intelligence community, IC/Defense Intelligence Enterprise, DIE, leadership must be addressed. The DIE accounts for the bulk for the intelligence community's personnel and a significant portion of its budget. Of the IC's 17 elements, 8 are within DoD, 2 are independent, and 7 belong to various other departments and agencies. Overall, the DoD provides 86% of the personnel who conduct intelligence activities, both military and civilian. The Defense Intelligence Enterprise must deliver accurate, unbiased, and timely insights consistently and with clarity, objectively, and independence. If they continue on their current path, however, both the DIE and the intelligence community writ large will continue to provide inaccurate and politicized intelligence assessments that mislead policymakers. Needed reforms: improve the intelligence process. Defense intelligence assets have been committed to the prosecution of operational campaigns since September 11, 2001, at the expense of our strategic objectives, and this has led to increased risk. Further, the DIE has evolved into a customer-based model, with the DIE IC trying to be supported of policy direction at the expense of the analytical integrity. The result has been a significant politicization of intelligence. Established unbiased intelligence reporting from DIE/IC senior leaders. As the leader of the DIE, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security should provide a top-line dissenting or clarifying view of DIE and IC assessments as needed. Number 2, align collection and analysis with vital national interests countering China and Russia. Number 3, establish an effective global federated intelligence framework with allies and partners in our combatant commands. Avoid the temptation to neglect areas that appear less pertinent, but that support a convergence of threats and the critical requirements to sustain those threats. Number 4, establish and sustain feedback loops to provide insight and direction for continuous improvement and accountability. We must revisit our assessments and understand where we got it right and where we got it wrong. Number 5, better exploit publicly available information, PAI data, and foster innovation to improve collection and analysis. We must end the practice of multiple DIE organizations paying to acquire the same PAI data and invest more in machine learning and artificial intelligence, AI, to exploit all open source and classified intelligence data. Number 6, remove policy obstacles that impede available technical solutions and tailored approaches in the order to preclude corruption at the point of collection. Number 7, develop statistical discrimination techniques based on relative value to deal with the volume of and velocity of available data and information, which are rapidly exceeding our ability to exploit and analyze available data and information efficiently. Expand the integration of intelligence activities. The prevalence of asymmetric warfare requires defense intelligence to leverage the unique authorities and capabilities of U.S. department and agencies, as well as our partners and allies, to competitive advantage. Number 1, create and improve cyber defense and capability. We must reevaluate the dual hat structure between the National Security Agency, NSA, and U.S. Cyber Command, USCYBERCOM. Number 2, resurrect economic analysis capability to improve our ability to counter Chinese whole-of-government strategies that combine security with predatory economic objectives. Number 3, resurrect critical thinking to provide true strategic intelligence that will enable the U.S. to counter global adversaries. In emerging technologies such as adversary advances and hypersonics, unmanned aerial systems, UAS, cyber domain, advanced fighter aircraft, and advanced undersea capabilities more effectively. Number four, rebuild human intelligence, HUMINT, and counterintelligence, CI, and improve their integration with defense, be defensive and offensive cyber operations. Number five, establish true alignment between DoD and DHS, both to improve the defense of critical U.S. infrastructure and national border integrity, and to develop vital information that enables defense against foreign targeted disruptions. Restore accountability and public trust. In recent years, public trust in defense intelligence has been eroded by, for example, flawed assumptions leading up to our Afghanistan withdrawal, flawed Russia-Ukraine assessments, divergences in relations with key Gulf allies, and voids being filed by Russia and China around the world. For trust to be restored and sustained, officials must be held accountable. Number one, restore DIE critical thinking, establish mechanisms to restore analytic integrity, and return to true intelligence-driven operations. The next administration should eliminate the conflict of interest in the current customer-based model, in which the customer is always right, by enforcing time-tested procedures that guarantee independent analysis, even if it means it challenging policymakers' assumptions. The Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Secretary Leadership role should be expanded to include providing analytic top-line views and improving DIE transparency by highlighting diverging views. Number two, elevate the DIE's voice in national policy discussions. Commensurate with the DIE's 75% share of the IC budget, present defense intelligence to senior policymakers, either independently to avoid all source bias or in consensus products like the National Intelligence Estimates. Eliminate peripheral intelligence obligations that do not advance military readiness. In 2019, following the catastrophic 2015 data breach at the United States Office of Personnel Management, OPM, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, DCSA, accepted transfer of the responsibility to conduct senior security clearance and suitability investigations for 95% of the U.S. government civilian workforce. This decision, which grew out of an intention to deconstruct OPM, was wrongheaded on many levels and made the federal bureaucracy dependent on a new overlay of DoD bureaucracy and a sense instilling DoD control of civilian managers. This function should be returned to OPM, except for military security clearance investigations. U.S. Army. The U.S. Army's mission is to deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars by providing ready, prompt, and sustained land dominance by Army forces across the full spectrum of conflict as part of the joint force. Today, however, the Army cannot execute its land dominance mission. The U.S. Army is an inflection point that is marked by more than a decade of steadily eroding budgets and diluted buying power and appreciable degradation in readiness and training capacity, a near crisis in the recruiting and retention of critical personnel, and a heavy of aging weapons system that no longer provide a qualitative edge over peer and near peer competitors, but will not be replaced in the near term. All of these challenges are set against the backdrop of a complex and dynamic global geopolitical environment that is exemplified and excavated by the triumph of our adversaries in Afghanistan. After a 20-year struggle, there as well as recent Russian outrages in the Ukraine and China's bellicosity, both on its borders and surrounding disputed regions. In spite of these ever-increasing operational pools, our army is consistently marked by a pervasive, political-driven Top-down focus on progressive social policies that emphasize matters like so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, and climate change, often to the detriment of the Army's core warfighting mission. Needed reforms, rebuild the Army. The total Army budget has decreased by roughly 11% since 2018, perilously affecting the service's readiness and ability to train and procure new personnel and equipment. Declining budgets and decreased buying power have forced the Army to lower training standards and opportunities to train proposed reductions in end strength slash military constructor programs to historically low levels and scale back essential modernization programs. Number one, the Army budget to remain the world's preeminent land power. Number two, accelerate the development and procurement of the six current Army modernization priorities: long range precision fires, the next generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, the Army network air and missile defense, and soldier lethality, to replace worn out and outdated combat systems and ensure ground combat dominance. Number three, increase funding to increase Army training and operational readiness. Number four, increase the Army force structure by 50,000 to handle two major regional contingencies simultaneously. And number five, reforming recruiting efforts. The Army missed its 2022 recruitment goal by 25% or 15,000 soldiers. Focus on deployability and sustained operations. The U.S. Army's very lethal ground force capability is irrelevant if it cannot quickly deploy to locations for employment and decisive operations to secure our global security interests. Additionally, Army provide the ground transportation of, I can't say it, of both personnel and equipment, fuel, food, and water, munitions, bombs and bullets, medical supplies and services, and veterinary services, food safety that are critical to sustainment of the other services. Number one, immediately increase the production and stockpiling of critical munitions and repair parts. Number two, prioritize expeditionary logistics and all force design and operational planning to guarantee entry into a contested theater of war. Number three, increase the level of joint force training, synchronization, and coordination focused on logistics. Number four, prepare to deploy forces from degraded U.S.-based transportation infrastructure that is compromised by opposing forces. Transform Army culture and training. The Army can no longer serve as the nation's social testing ground. A rebuilt Army that is focused again on its core warfighting mission and empowered with the tools, resources, and authorities it needs to accomplish that mission must be the next administration's highest defense priority. Number one, stop using the Army as a test bed for social evolution. Misusing the Army in this way detracts from its core purpose while doing little to reshape the American social structure. The Army no longer reflects national demographics to the degree that it did before 1974, when the draft was eliminated. Number two, demand accountability in senior leaders to reverse the decline in public support for military service. Number three, reestablish the experiential base for the planning, execution, and leadership of Army formation in large-scale operations. Currently, there are no general or field grade officers who serve as planners or commanders against a near peer adversary in combat. Page 110. Number four, examine the logic of emerging Army concepts about employing masked long-range fires and effects without considering how to gain advantage by closing with and dominating an adversary on land. Number five, recognize that high-intensity land combat operations cannot be sustained through short-term individual or unit rotations in the style of the sustained low-intensity campaigns conducted over the past 20 years. Number 6, transform how the National Guard is employed during extended operations, short of declared war to preclude back-to-back federal and state deployments of National Guard soldiers in order to stabilize and preserve national volunteerism in our communities. Number 7, revamp Army school curricula to concentrate on preparation for large-scale land operations that focus on defeating a peer threat. Number 8, address the underlying casual issues driving increasing Army suicide rates, which have surpassed pre-World II rates and are now eclipsing the rate among civilians. U.S. Navy. As noted at the beginning of this chapter, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to provide and maintain a Navy. Inherent in this phrase is a recognition that there is a vital national interest in the maritime environment and that this national interest requires sustained planning and investment. This is as true today as it was almost 250 years ago and will remain true into the future. The U.S. Navy, USN, exists for two primary reasons: to project prompt, sustained, and effective combat power globally, both at sea and ashore, and to deter aggression by potential adversaries by maintaining a forward operating presence in conjunction with allies and partners. Today, the People's Republic of China, People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, can challenge the USN's ability to accomplish its mission in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. In the production, employment, and control of maritime forces, the USN must consider the scope and rate of technological change and, where appropriate, adapt its processes at workforce development. In balancing the necessary long-term industrial model of naval platforms against emerging short-term opportunities, the USN must take account of advances that may present vulnerabilities and risk, as well as assured and secure. Needed reforms. Invest in and expand force structure. The USN's organizing principle remains platform-centered. Vessels manned by sailors. The manned surface and subsurface focuses act in concert with land-based, air-based, and space-based forces to project power outside sovereign territory, principally by operating in international waters. Investments must be closely coordinated with these other elements of military power. Number 1, build a fleet of more than 355 ships. Number 2, develop and field unmanned systems to augment the manned forces. Number 3, require that range and lethality be the key factors in all procurement and sustainment decisions for ships, aircrafts, and munitions. Reestablish the General Board. In contrast with the Navy General Board that serves ship development so well during the interwar period, the current joint process for defining the requirements for major defense acquisitions is not well suited to long-term planning of the sort that is needed for USN fleet architecture and shipbuilding. The Interwar General Board should serve as a model, empowered with final decision authority over all requirements, documents concerning ships and the major defense system folded on ships. The individual board members would ensure a broad base of knowledge as well as independent thinking. Establish a rapid capabilities office. The USN must transition technology into warfighting capability more rapidly. It must foster a culture of innovation that includes connecting theoretical and intangible ideas with real production environments that produce tangible and practical outcomes, and adapting proven processes to advance material solutions. Harness innovation and willingness to tolerate risk so that good enough systems can be fielded rapidly. Number 2, use the Space Development Agency as a model. Number 3, establish an oversight board of directors made up of the service chief, service secretary, and under service secretary of defense for acquisition and sustainment. Accelerate the purchase of key munitions. It takes years to build and maintain navies, but only hours to expend their ordnance in combat. The USN must be prepared to expend large quantities of air-launched and sea-launched stealthy precision cruise missiles against targets, both at sea and ashore. Additionally, modern air defenses require the use of high-performance surface-to-air missiles. Number one, produce key munitions at the maximum rate with significant capacity. Number two, work with the Congress, employ the widest possible range of techniques to enhance the munitions supply chains and workforce. Enhance warfighter development. The USN requires a variety of documented qualifications for personnel to advance in their careers and assume leadership positions. It also requires individual professional qualifications that are focused on war fighting. Number one, mandates qualifications that demonstrate an understanding of core competence in collective integrated warfighting, especially based on current plans and technologies. Number two, elevate the headquarters staff focused on warfighter development in seven, within the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, OPNAV, and empower it to develop such requirements. Number three, require that war games be utilized as experiential learning environments for the participants as a prerequisite for achieving career milestones, department heads, commanding officers, and major commanders. Number four, highlighting and training and leader development that USN forces can and must maintain the ability to operate from and or defend sovereign territory to include our allies and partners. Number five, train to balance effects from kinetic to non-kinetic and from lethal to non-lethal through effective command control. U.S. Air Force, page 112 or page 145 out of 920. U.S. Air Force. The U.S. Air Force today lacks a force structure with the lethality, survivability, and capacity to fight a major conflict with a greater power like China, deter nuclear threats, and meet its other operational requirements under the National Defense Strategy. For 30 years, the Air Force has received less annual funding, if pass-through funding, defined as money in the Air Force budget that does not go to the Air Force, is removed from the equation, than the Army and Navy have received. This underfunding has forced the Air Force to cut its forces and forego modernizing aging weapon systems that were never designed to operate in current threat environments and are structurally and mechanically exhausted. The result is an Air Force that is the oldest, smallest, and least ready in its history. The decline in Air Force capacity and capability is occurring at the same time the security environment demands the very options that the Air Force uniquely provides. Combatant commanders routinely request more Air Force capabilities than the service has the capacity to provide. The Air Force today simply cannot accomplish all of the missions it is required to perform. The Air Force has consistently stated on the official record that it is not sized to meet the mission demands placed on it by the various U.S. commands. A 2018 study, The Air Force We Need, showed a 24% deficits in Air Force capacity to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Those conclusions remains valid and are more pronounced today because of subsequent aircraft retirements. The demand is also higher because of world events. To understand these trends, one needs to consider that the Air Force's future 5-year budget plan retires 1,463 aircraft while buying just 467. This makes for a reduction of 996 aircraft by 2027. The net result is a force that is smaller, older, and less ready at a time when demand is burgeoning. Needed reforms: increase spending and budget accuracy in line with a threat-based strategy. Returning the U.S. military to a force that can achieve deterrence or win in a fight if necessary requires returning to a threat-based defense strategy. Real budget growth combined with a more equitable distribution of resources across the armed services, the only realistic way to create a modernized Air Force with the capacity to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Additionally, as noted above, pass-through funding causes numbers cited in current DoD budget documents to be higher than the dollar amounts actually received by the Air Force. Number one, adopt a two-war force defense strategy with scenarios for each service that will allow the Air Force to attain the resources it requires by developing a force sizing construct that reflects what is required to accomplish strategic objectives. Number two, eliminate pass-through funding, which has grown to more than $40 billion per year and has caused the Air Force to chronically underfunded for decades. Number three, increase the Air Force budget by 5% annually after adjusting for inflation to reverse the decline in size, age, and readiness and facilitate the transition to a mere modern lethal and survivable force. Reduce near-term and mid-term risks. Increasing the Air Force's acquisition of next-generation capabilities that either are or soon will be in production will increase the ability of the United States to deter or defeat near-term to mid-term threats. Number one, increase F-35A procurement to 60 to 80 per year. Number two, build the capacity for a B-21 production rate of 15 to 18 aircraft per year, along with applicable elements of the B-21 long-range strike family of systems. Number three, increase Air Force airlift and aerial refueling capacity to support agile combat employment, operations that generate combat sorties from a highly dispersed posture in both Europe and the Pacific. Number four, develop and buy larger quantities of advanced mid-range weapons, 50 nanometers to 200 nanometers, that are sized to maximize targets per sortie for stealth aircraft flying in contested environments against target sets that could exceed 100,000 aim points. Number five, accelerate the development and production of the Centennial Intercontinental Ballistic Missile to reduce the risk inherent in an aging Minuteman I-3 force in light of China's nuclear modernization breakout. Number six, increase the number of EC-37B electronic warfare aircraft from 10 to 20 in order to achieve a minimum capacity to engage growing threats from China across the electromagnetic spectrum. Invest in future Air Force programs and efforts. Increasingly capable adversaries require new capabilities to enable victory against those adversaries. Number one, attain an operationally optimized advanced battle management system as the Air Force element of the DoD Joint All-Domain Command and Control Enterprise. Number two, produce the next generation air dominance system of systems, air moving target indication, other sensors, communications, command and control weapons in uninhibited vehicles. Number three, achieve moving target engagement capability and capacity against sea surface and ground mobile targets at the scale necessary to meet the needs of the national defense strategy. Number four, build resilient basing, sustainment, and communications for survivability in a contested environment. Number five, establish a rigorous and sufficiently funded electromagnetic spectrum operations recovery plan to make up for more than 20 years of neglect of this mission area. U.S. Marine Corps. The U.S. Marine Corps is the maritime land force of the Department of Defense and the Department of the Navy. It serves as a critical role as an expeditionary amphibious force that can project power from sea to shore and beyond while performing other specialized missions while securing America's diplomatic outposts abroad. Between the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and the conclusion of U.S. military operations in Afghanistan in August 2022, the Marine Corps engaged in extended operations ashore as directed by the Security Defense, leaving it with little opportunity or ability to train for and execute the naval and amphibious operations for which it is uniquely suited and directed by law. This lengthy divergence from its primary mission led to deep concern that the Corps had become a second land army, prompting senior Marine Corps leaders to push for the service to return to the sea. In addition to the USMC, spent nearly 2 decades fighting counterinsurgency wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and developed capabilities that were specifically geared to those fights, have been limited utility in scenarios involved evenly matched and has advanced enemies or amphibious operations that are necessary for the projection of naval power. As a result, Marine Corps Commandant General David H. Berger developed and began to implement Force Design 2030, a plan that, if completed, would the most radical transformation of the Marine Corps since World War II. The successful implementation of this forceful redesign, coupled with reforms in the Marine Corps personnel system and the Navy's amphibious shipbuilding plans, will be critical to ensuring the Corps' future combat effectiveness. Needed reforms: divest systems to implement the force design of the 2030 transformation. Divesting equipment that is less relevant to distributed low signature operations in a contested maritime environment will make funds available for modernization. Number 1, transform USMC force structure. A, eliminate all USMC law enforcement battalions. B, transform at least one Marine infantry regiment into a Marine littoral regiment. C, reduce the size of remaining infantry battalions. Number 2, divest systems or equipment that are best suited to heavier U.S. Army units. A, maintain divestment for MI Abrams tanks. B, eliminate the majority of tube artillery M777 batteries. C, reduce the number of advanced amphibious assault vehicles and the number of their replacements. Use funds made available by divestment of systems to support new systems that are geared to the likely needs of future conflicts. A, increase the number of rocket artillery batteries, HIMARS. B, increase the number of upgraded light armored vehicle, LAV companies. C, increase the number of unmanned aerial systems and anti-air systems, including counter-UAS systems. D, develop long-range strike missiles, anti-ship missiles for the Corps. E, modernize USMC infantry equipment. Transform the USMC personnel paradigm. More than other services, the USMC relies heavily on junior non-commissioned officers, NCOs, to staff key positions across the force, but especially in combat areas. For example, E4s routinely hold squad leader billets when the Army normally has an E6S in those billets. The nature of more distributed operations and the increasingly complex responsibilities of Marine Corps Rifle Squad and platoon under Force Design 2030 will only put more responsibility on the backs of squad leaders and platoon sergeants, increasing the need for more senior Marines in those critical positions. Additionally, the Corps needs to improve its retention of junior NCOs after their first enlistment. The Marines have much lower rates of re-enlistment than other branches. Number 1, align the USMC's combat arms rank structure with the U.S. Army squad's leader billets are for E6s and platoon sergeant billets are for E7s. Number 2, create better incentives to retain talented junior NCOs, especially in infantry and other critical military occupational specialties. Number 3, reduce unnecessary deployments to increase dwell time in order to enable more robust primary military education. military education. Align Navy amphibious shipbuilding with Force Design 2030. The U.S. Navy has struggled for decades to maintain an amphibious fleet that could support USMC war plans around large-scale amphibious operations. In addition, amphibious shipbuilding has often had to compete against other priorities within a constrained budget and limited shipbuilding capacity. Number one, develop and produce light amphibious warships, LAWs, to produce more distributed amphibious operations, especially in the Pacific. Number two, maintain 28 and 31 larger amphibious warships as opposed to the 25 specified in current Navy shipbuilding plans and the 38 specified before 2020. U.S. Space Force. U.S. Space Force conducts global space operations to sustain and enhance air, land, and sea effectiveness, lethality, and superiority by surviving secure broadband and global communications, precision, position, navigation, and timing accuracy, attack warning and threat tracking and targeting capability, real-time intelligence of surveillance and reconnaissance information. And there is sure continuity of operations both by defending U.S. assets and by conducting offensive operations that are capable of imposing unacceptable losses on adversaries that might seek to attack them. The U.S. Space Force, USSF, was established to assure continuous global and theater combat support from space to deter attacks against U.S. space assets and to prevail in space should determined fail. The USSF posture was conceived as a balance of offensive and defensive deterrent capabilities designed for maximum effectiveness. Needed reforms. Reverse the Biden administration defense posture. The Biden administration has eliminated almost all offensive deterrence capabilities and instead will rely solely on defensive capabilities of disaggregation, maneuver, and reconstitution. The most costly, the slowest, and ultimately the most fragile architecture selection. Number one, reestablish offensive capabilities to guarantee a favorable balance of forces, efficiently manage the full deterrence spectrum, and seriously compliance enemy calculations of a successful first strike against U.S. space assets. Number two, restore architectural balance in U.S. space forces, both offensive and defensive, to restore deterrence dominance efficiently and quickly. Number three, rapidly expand space control capability to include cislunar space, the region beyond at geosynchronous altitude, and encompassing the moon to provide early warning of an enemy attack. Number four, seek arms controls and rules of the road, understandings only when they are unambiguous in the interest of the U.S. and its allies and prohibit their unilateral implementation. Reduce overclassification. The USSF must move beyond the Cold War era culture of secrecy and overclassification that surrounded military space to facilitate greater coordination and synchronization of efforts across the government and commercial sectors. Declassify appropriate information about terrestrial and on-orbit space capabilities that threaten the U.S. space constellation, as well as those pursued by our competitors, to secure the principal right to counter them offensively. Implement policies suited to a mature USSF. No longer a newborn, the USSF has entered its fourth year of existence, and the lessons learned can be incorporated across all facets of the forces to increase its effectiveness. Number one, restructure from the current unity of effort structure to unity of command. Number two, lead the U.S. government's development of a clear and unambiguous declaratory policy that the United States will operate at will and in space and enforce those operations with capabilities that ensure effective deterrence and the ability to impose our will if necessary. Number three, in the current study phase of concept development and issue, necessary guidance for the development and fielding of offensive capabilities. Number four, alter the Space Development Agency's current failed city approach, current fail early approach, and transition to a methodology that maintains aggressiveness timelines, but with significant greater engineering rigor, with special attention to sustainment, support, and fully integrated space operations. Number five, increase the number of general officer positions to ensure the Space Force's ability to compete for resources on a common basis with the other services. And number six, explore creation of a Space Force Academy to attract top aero astro students, engineers, and scientists, and develop astronauts. The academy could be attached initially to a large existing research university like the California Institute of Technology or MIT, share faculty and funding, and eventually be built separately to be on par with the other services academies. U.S. Cyber Command. U.S. Cybercom was established in 2010 by the Department of Defense to unify the direction of cyberspace operations, strengthen DoD cyberspace capabilities, and integrate and enhance U.S. cyber expertise. Cyber capabilities and threats are evolving rapidly. Accordingly, a conservative administration should be especially sensitive to and prepared to meet the challenges presented by the bureaucratic silos and appropriately rigid tactical doctrine and strategic thinking historic tendency to lag behind technological advancement or capability. The preliminary evidence from the war in Ukraine suggests that existing cyber doctrine and certain capability and target assumptions may be incorrect or misplaced. The following recommendations, therefore, presuppose that there will be a rigorous lessons learned analysis and review of existing U.S. doctrine in light of the battlefield evidence. Needed reforms. Ensure that U.S. cybercom is properly focused. Mission creep is leading to wasteful overlap with the Department of Homeland Security, National Security Agency, Department of Defense, and Central Intelligence Agency. Separate U.S. cybercom from the National Security Agency per congressional direction. Number two, conduct effective offensive cyber effects operations at the tactical and strategic levels. Number three, expand defensive cyber effects operations authorized by President Trump's classified national security Presidential Memorandum 13, United States Cyber Operations Policy. Number four, end U.S. cybercom's participation in federal efforts to fortify U.S. election to eliminate the perception that DoD is engaging in partisan politics. Increase U.S. cybercom's effectiveness. Number one, accelerate the integration of cyber and electronic warfare doctrine and capabilities abiding by the time-tested norms of combined arms warfare. Number two, mandate that the development teams will include both coders and solidifiers and soldiers, air crews, and sailors with kinetic experience at the platoon level. Number three, break the paradigm of cyber authorities held at the strategic level. Number four, increase cyber resilience by, for example, protecting the nuclear command, control, and communications network in the Air Force's Cyber Resilience Office for Weapons Systems, CROWS. Number five, expand coordination of joint operation with allies. Number six, implement the Government Accountability Office's recommendation that the DoD Chief Information Officer, Commander of U.S. Cybercom, and Commander of Joint Force Headquarters, DoD Information Network, align policy and system requirements to enable DoD to have enterprise-wide visibility of cyber incident reporting to support tactical, strategic, and military strategies for response. Rationalize strategy and doctrine. Update the October 2022 national security strategy to define DoD roles and responsibilities beyond existing platitudes. Number 2, apply traditional deterrence strategies and principles for using cyber EW in retaliation for foreign cyber attacks and or EW actions against U.S. infrastructure and citizens. Special operations and forces. Let's see how much we got. Okay, yeah, we're going to. I think that's a good place to stop. Realizing that I've read 153 pages and 120 pages within this section. So we're going to stop there. Adriane Mayes, president of CCC Because We Care Foundation, has incorporated the first parts of the reading of Project 2025 900-page mandate for leadership, and leave in the comments if this is valuable, helpful in regards to just information, education on this Independence Day. Hear the fireworks outside. Literally, probably could see them if I opened the blinds. But the great thing is almost 3 hours of Project 2025 900-page mandate, and we're going to leave off we were right before ending the 4th chapter. So we're going to pick up on that tomorrow and incorporate this every day. So we already had the billionaire journey where we had the vlog that occurs in the morning. And you actually can check out at Adriane Mayes for day 59 of the billionaire journey. And so the Random Acts of Kindness campaign that providing, just knowing that literacy in the state of Michigan is one of the least. And so we have this 900-page document that has been provided for a mandate for leadership that the Donald Trump and the Joe Biden administrations, they went to debates a couple of days or last week in regards to just, the process leading up to the election, November 2024. So knowing that literacy is a problem in the state of Michigan, having a 900-page document, and myself even being intimidated when you see 900 pages. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my gosh. But I wanted to read it. I wanted to see what direction that our future is going and taking us into the direction of, or maybe not, before we even incorporate a vote, before we get our minds polluted with all of the messages of everyone else telling you if Project 2025 is good or bad, or who's leading it or who's not. And I don't want to have any type of biased opinion within this discussion. I want to clearly lead the facts. I'll leave biased opinion to after I present all of the facts. So what the plan is, seeing how long it's taking to read this verbally, didn't know how long it was going to take. I did about 4 hours earlier today and almost 3 hours now. So what the plan of execution will be is daily, I will pick up and be able to read. So throughout the day, we're going to be reaching out to different small business owners for sponsorship, for the Random Acts of Kindness sponsorship, and look in the actual comments below for more information. But, at 7 p.m. Each day until it's completed, I'm going to commit to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Random Acts of Kindness. Adriane Mayes will pick up reading where we left off. I know there's 30 chapters. We were right at the end of chapter 4, but that's a good place to end, chapter 4, starting out. So you have the content starting off July 4th, Independence Day. Wish I would have gotten started earlier, but didn't have the great idea until about 10:30 this morning. So I was like, great idea. So to be able to just conquer that element of not having that education, not knowing about it. So at least anybody in the world can go to at Adriane Mayes and find out about the Project 2025 and have no additional information from me included in that. It's going to be literally what the documentation is, and you choose on your own. You have the freedom to choose, freedom to be free, freedom to educate, and I'm providing you the tool of understanding, of listening between your ears, because sometimes reading may become difficult. And reading that document, it could be at a level that might be a lot, not a lot. So the end goal for me for doing this is to break it up into 60-second segments as well. And for Random Acts of Kindness 2024, post those so they can be readily available to anybody that may need to get that type of information. Because as you're building your wealth and your financial education plan in 2024, you have to incorporate what's down the line for your tax wealth and looking at your benefits in setting up your billionaire plan. So that's the whole thought process behind the mindset. You have to do your education. And I don't like, when talking and consulting with clients, how you say, I read this, I did this, and I do a lot of reading and educating. And it's a daily process and grind for myself, but I wanted to bring that to you live and being able to provide that to you, because maybe somebody doesn't read as much as I do. But this information needs to be heard and does not need to be censored, and it needs to be at least understood. You can make your own interpretation. As I can have mine, you can have your own. That's not my job here, is to tell you what to do. You're going to have enough of the media to do that. I'm just here to read you what's on the paper in regards to what's in and what is listed for Project 2025, the mandate for leadership. So none of these opinions are my own of Adriane Mayes. I am literally none biased in this scenario, but the Random Act of Kindness action is reading this for those who cannot read 900 pages. So that's going to be the Random Act of Kindness leading up to the launch of our event, which is going to be on July the 11th, 2022. So Unica Gaines and Adriane Mayes are excited to bring 15 years of educating the community, acts of kindness, holiday giving, random acts of kindness, our work and learning experience program, and having digital marketing education, being able to have a resource for people to build these digital franchise brands leveraging AI. But before you do all of that, you have to know the policies. You have to know what's going on in the world, and you have to keep yourself educated to empower, model, innovate, and then prosper. So that's what we're doing here, taking through the steps, going through the education, going through the time, going through the grind, building the campaign to actually have the amazing random acts of kindness to be like Mr. Beast. If you check out his page today, it popped up. He gave away 100 houses and literally was running down the street with cash in his hand. I mean, just why not? If you have the actual money, he's giving away houses, Mr. Beast. So check him out on YouTube. And that's the direction that we want to go into. Like, give to those that are less fortunate. He utilized the platform of social media and grew over the years and has capitalized and has his own marketing firm and does well. So when you actually push play and you have your own billionaire plan, you can do things like build 100 houses and give people and give it away. So those are things that we want to do as well. And so we have to build along the way, and we don't mind doing the work. So CCC Because We Care Foundation, building billionaire brands and understanding this Project 2025, the 900-page mandate for leadership live. If you have enjoyed this almost 3-hour segments, please drop in the comments so let me know and show me some love. What up, dope? Detroit One Product Educate, and the captain of the Detroit ChatGPT revolution, but the president of CCC Because We Care Foundation. Adriane Mayes, AI Genius, comes to you humbly on this July 4th. Thanks every single last veteran for serving our country. And thanks everyone in regards to the growth and building of where we are today. But where we'll end up, where we'll be tomorrow, is the educating, the listening, and understanding the tools that we have in front of us, as well as to read and find out what is being already engineered in the governmental system So if need be to re-engineer your education, your employment, your retirement plan, you can actually do so in alignment with what's going on in Washington. It's if you're here in the United States or globally, that's United States is a big fraction of what happens in our economy. So that's my tidbit I'm gonna leave you with tonight. So check me out again tomorrow. I know definitely at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, coming to you live. Adriane Mayes, AI Genius. And I'm already live on Saturdays, but we're gonna stick to the 7 o'clock because again, till I get this part done, then I'll tell you what we'll do tomorrow. So I'll see you tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time during the day. Companies, you know, Adriane Mayes, I'm gonna be on the phone following up in regards to our random acts of kindness donation and sponsorship packages. So check out now cccwecaremi.com/sponsor. And don't hesitate to jump over to our community and make sure you join and leave in the comments acts of kindness of something that you can actually share with someone. As the final little tidbit for today. So with our acts of kindness community, join over and just leave something like, because again, this is a lot. So what is one thing that you can share with someone as a random act of kindness to give them knowledge about Project 2025? And there is a link to this document that I'm reading here in the Random Acts of Kindness community. Free community, not a charge to get in here right now. But again, that will change in the future because value is value. But right now, the value is giving you these random acts of kindness and building and submitting these ideas so that we can get them funded, so we can help build with like minds around us. That's just the main goal. Build with like minds that has the same giving personalities, because we want to give to action takers and then action takers that want to build so we can build together. That's the whole plan, right? You don't want to build alone. So when you're building and owning it and designing your family, your faith, your fears, your finance, and your fitness, that's how you look at designing your new environment. You have to go find those action takers and you have to build that community, and you're able to do that with digital real estate and digital marketing and digital franchise brands. And your girl, Adriane Mayes, is here to show you how to build those systems, utilizing systems like Go High Level or Deal.ai or Ambassador to show you how to be a brand ambassador. As you noticed in Project 2025, it talked about that a little bit. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. It was a long one for your girl, Adriane Mayes, but it was one that was needed. And so we'll pick this up again tomorrow. Project 2025, the 900-page mandate for leadership live, part 2. We'll pick up part 3 tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at Adriane Mayes. I can, I will, I must. Let's go. Deuces. What up, though, Detroit? Deuces.